Cavemen once believed the World Bank was a treasure cave, a sacred mountain of gold guarded by wise elders who handed out shiny nuggets to struggling tribes. You walk in poor, you walk out prosperous. New roads, new wells, new spears. Maybe even an indoor fire pit with proper smoke ventilation. That was the myth. Then Caveman walked inside. The cave was not filled with gold. It was filled with contracts. Scrolls stacked higher than a mammoth's thigh. Pages of conditions. Paragraphs of repayment schedules. Clauses whispering words like interest accrual, policy reform, sovereign obligation, and a man in a thin neck rope. They call it a tie, tapping glowing rocks and speaking softly about development financing. Caveman nodded wisely. Inside, brain melted. Because the first truth hit like a falling stone. The World Bank does not give money. It lends money. This may sound obvious, but across the world, in villages, cities, parliaments, millions still speak of the World Bank as if it were a charity. A benevolent uncle, a rain cloud that waters poor nations. It is not a rain cloud. It is a credit line. And like every credit line in history, it must be repaid. With interest, whether the project succeeds or fails. Even if the road collapses, even if the chief steals the funds, even if drought burns the harvest, still repaid. Cavemen imagined walking into the tribe council and declaring, "We borrow from Big Cave. We build great statue of Chief Papa riding mammoth." The tribe cheers. Drums beat, ribbons cut. 3 moons later, statue half finished. Water still dirty. Farms still dry. Debt already growing. This is not a joke, carved in stone. This is how modern nations stumble. Since its creation in 1944, after the ruins of World War II, the World Bank was designed not as charity, but as reconstruction machinery. First Europe, then developing nations. Its mission was simple. Finance long-term development projects that increase productive capacity. Bridges, ports, power plants, irrigation systems, schools, not statues. But here's where the tension begins. A loan for productive infrastructure can raise national income. A new port lowers shipping costs. A power grid increases industrial output. A highway reduces trade friction. If national income grows faster than debt payments, the loan becomes a ladder. But if money is misused, corruption, vanity projects, political signaling, debt becomes a chain. And debt chains are heavy. Cavemen learned quickly that the World Bank is not a villain, but it is not a savior either. It is a tool, and tools amplify character. Give a hammer to a builder, you get a house. Give a hammer to a fool, you get a broken window. Throughout the late 20th century, dozens of countries rushed toward this gift cave. Latin America borrowed heavily in the 1970s to industrialize quickly. Many projects were productive, many were not. When U.S. interest rates spiked in the 1980s, debt crises erupted. Africa saw similar cycles. Infrastructure projects promised growth. Some delivered. Some became empty monuments. The debt remained real. This is why the scroll is thicker than mammoth thigh. Because the World Bank is not lending its own berries. It lends pooled capital from member countries, which means the risk is calculated, structured, conditioned, and political. Caveman's wife, Luna Logic, once threw sandal at Caveman's head and shouted, "You borrowed future berries for shiny rock." She was not angry at the bank. She was angry at stupidity. And that is the difference most people miss. The World Bank cannot force a nation to build a statue. It can approve a loan. It can attach conditions. It can request feasibility studies. But leaders choose the project. Leaders sign the scroll. Citizens carry the weight. So before we scream World Bank evil or World Bank hero, we must understand the deeper mechanism. What is it really? How does it actually function? Who controls it? Why does it sometimes seem to rescue nations and other times trap them? Because once cavemen realized loans were not gifts, a more uncomfortable truth began crawling into brain like stubborn turtle. Hope is the most powerful currency of all, and desperate tribes will sign almost anything for hope. The question is not whether the World Bank lends money. The question is whether the money grows something real or only feeds pride. And to understand that, we must go back to the fire, to the moment the system was built. Before cavemen understood the World Bank, cavemen had to understand something older than banks: desperation. A poor tribe looks at the horizon and sees a future made of mud. Bad roads, weak harvests, sickness, and children who learn to count only as far as their fingers. They know what they need: clean water, a bridge, irrigation, power, but they do not have the berries to build it. Development is expensive. A modern road is not just stones. It is engineers, machinery, permits, imported materials, long maintenance contracts. A dam is not just a wall. It is turbines, grid integration, resettlement plans, environmental impact reports, financing structures that stretch decades. And most countries, especially poorer ones, cannot fund these things purely from taxes or savings. Not fast enough, not at the scale required. So they borrow. This is the first reason the World Bank exists: to convert long-term development dreams into immediate construction. But borrowing is never just about money. Borrowing is about power. When you lend to a nation, you gain influence over its choices. Not because you hold a gun, because you hold time. You control the future payments. You become a silent voice in the budget, whispering every year, "Pay me first." And that is why the World Bank is not charity. It is a structured relationship between creditor and sovereign borrower. Now, in caveman terms, it looks like this. A tribe wants a new road to the jungle market. The tribe goes to the money cave. The money cave says, "Yes, we can finance the road." Caveman cheers. Then the cave elder slides forward a scroll and says quietly, "But first, fix your system." And here the second truth arrives. World Bank loans often come with conditions. Not always the same kind, not always the same intensity, but the logic is consistent. Money alone doesn't create development if the systems around it are broken. If corruption steals the cement, the road collapses. If tax collection is rotten, repayment fails. If state utilities leak money, a power project becomes a drain. So the bank attaches reforms rules designed to improve the odds that the project works and the borrower repays. Caveman once explained it like borrowing a spear. You ask neighbor tribe for spear to hunt mammoth. Neighbor says, "Sure, but first, stop drinking leaf juice every morning. Also, train your hunters. Also, stop chief from taking all meat." The tribe laughs. But that is what conditionality feels like. Outside control over internal behavior. Sometimes conditionality is useful. Sometimes it's brutal. Sometimes it becomes political cover for leaders to hurt their people. This is why the World Bank creates two camps in every village market. Camp 1 says, "Loan will save us." Camp 2 says, "Loan will enslave us." And Caveman stands in the middle like confused goat, because Caveman has seen both happen. One tribe borrows and builds a road through the jungle. Trade increases. Salt comes in. Medicine arrives. Children go to school. The tribe eats meat every third night instead of once a full moon. The loan becomes a ladder. Another tribe borrows and builds a marble palace with warm baths and singing fish ponds. No farms improve. No wells dug. No tools bought. Then tax collectors arrive. Goats taken. Grain seized, blankets stripped from mothers' hands. The palace shines. The people starve. The loan becomes a chain. So what separates ladder from chain? Not the existence of debt, but the use of debt. Debt is a multiplier. It accelerates whatever you already are. If leadership is competent, debt can speed up development. If leadership is corrupt, debt speeds up collapse. This is why Luna Logic screamed, The World Bank loan is for things that grow the tribe. Not ego decorations, but the story gets darker. Because even when a project is productive, the loan can still produce pain. Why? Because reforms can demand sacrifice in the present to stabilize the future. Imagine the World Bank tells a country to reduce fuel subsidies because the government is bleeding money. Fuel prices rise. Transport becomes expensive. Food prices climb. People riot. Or the bank recommends privatizing inefficient state companies to stop losses. Workers lose jobs. Families suffer. To a villager, it looks like this. We borrowed money, and now we pay more for bread. And the villager is not wrong. This is the uncomfortable moral tension of development lending. Sometimes the system is already broken, and reform is necessary. Sometimes reform is imposed too fast, too harsh, and people break first. And sometimes leaders use the reform label to do things that have nothing to do with development, selling public assets to friends, cutting help for the poor while buying new chariots, pretending discipline while stealing quietly. So Caveman learns a deeper truth. World Bank money is never free. It comes with strings like spiderweb. Sometimes strings guide a tribe out of swamp. Sometimes strings choke a tribe if leaders pull wrong. And then Grandmother Mercy Johnson appears from the cooking hut, grabbing Caveman's ear. "You stop whining," she says. "Come walk." She brings Caveman to an old dirt path that used to become mud lake every rain. Traders stopped coming. Farmers lost crops carrying baskets through swamp. Children late to school because shoes stuck. Now there is a smooth stone road, wide like Mammoth's back. Traders roll carts. Farmers sell extra corn. Fish arrives before it spoils. Prices improve. People smile. Grandmother points at a new well. Clean water. Less sickness. Children stronger. A World Bank loan helped this, she whispers. Caveman's head spins like drunk pigeon. The loans are not always evil. The problem is not borrowing. The problem is what a tribe does with borrowed berries. Grandmother lays out the rule-like soup recipe. A good loan builds something that produces more value later. A bad loan builds something that produces applause now. Road brings trade. School brings knowledge. Power brings factories. Irrigation brings crops. A palace brings selfies. A statue brings pigeons. A festival dome brings tax collectors. And then, like a shadow behind the firelight, another question appears. If the World Bank can produce good outcomes, why does it keep lending into places with bad leaders? Why do dumb chiefs keep getting scrolls? Cavemen will walk back to the money cave to ask. And there, we will stop seeing the World Bank as a single entity and start seeing it as a machine. A machine with incentives. A machine with politics. A machine with voting power. Caveman returned to the big money cave, not as naive hunter, but as suspicious student. This time, Caveman did not ask how much gold. Caveman asked, who owns this cave? Bank Elder Greg with the tiny glasses adjusted his neck rope and pulled out a chart. Numbers everywhere. Percentages, voting shares, capital subscriptions. Well, Greg said carefully, the World Bank is owned by its member countries. Caveman nodded. Sounds fair. All tribes together. Equal voices around the fire. Are all tribes equal? Caveman asked. Greg coughed. Not exactly. Here is the third truth. The World Bank is not a floating god of fairness. It is a shareholder institution. Countries buy shares. The more capital a country contributes, the more voting power it receives. This is not corruption. It is design. And design shapes power. The United States holds the largest voting share in the World Bank. Other major economies follow Japan, China, Germany, the United Kingdom, France. Small, poor countries. Tiny votes. Soft voices. So when a large country with massive financial contributions speaks in board meetings, the echo is stronger. Caveman imagined a tribe council where the biggest mammoth hunter owns most of the spears. When it's time to decide where to hunt, guess who leads? Sometimes wisely, sometimes strategically, but always influentially. Now here is where the story deepens. Because the World Bank does not just lend money, it lends in alignment with global strategy. Officially, projects must meet development criteria. Unofficially, development and geopolitics often overlap. A port in one region may be approved quickly because global trade routes depend on it. An irrigation project in a remote, politically unstable region might wait longer. Does this mean the bank is evil? No. It means power follows money, and money follows interest. Throughout history, powerful nations have shaped global finance. In the 19th century, British banks financed railways across Argentina and India, officially for development, strategically for trade routes that benefited London. In the 20th century, American capital shaped post-war Europe through the Marshall Plan, not purely altruistic, but also to secure markets and contain rival influence. The World Bank exists inside this lineage. It is a tool of development, yes, but it is also a mechanism of influence. When a country accepts World Bank financing, it is not just accepting cash. It is integrating deeper into a system shaped largely by powerful economies. Open your markets. Liberalize trade. Strengthen investor protections. Stabilize currency. Fight corruption. All reasonable on paper, all sometimes painful in reality. And sometimes, these reforms tilt economies toward global capital rather than domestic control. Caveman blinked. So biggest mammoth hunter decides where spears go. Greg nodded slowly. But here is the nuance experts often miss in market shouting. The World Bank does not operate like a conspiracy bunker. Its staff include economists, engineers, public health specialists, many deeply committed to poverty reduction. Projects are evaluated through technical review. Social and environmental safeguards exist. There are audit systems. But institutions reflect power balances, and power balances shape incentives. If rich countries want stability in a region because it protects trade, projects aligned with that stability move faster. If strategic minerals are needed for green energy transition, financing aligns with extraction and supply chains. If global financial stability is threatened, emergency packages prioritize systemic risk. So cavemen realized something uncomfortable. The World Bank is not neutral sky god. It is a system made of countries, leaders, competing interests. It is human. And humans bring politics wherever they build. Now another confusion entered the cave. Trader Clinton shouted in the market one day, "IMF coming to help struggling tribes." Cavemen packed scrolls excitedly. Good. We need a new irrigation canal. But when cavemen arrived at the shiny office, a serious woman named Nell from finance shook her head. "We are IMF," she said. "We do not build roads." That is the fourth truth. The World Bank and the IMF are cousins, born in the same Bretton Woods meeting in 1944, but they have different roles. The World Bank finances long-term development projects, roads, dams, schools, power plants. The IMF stabilizes economies in crisis, currency crashes, balance of payments collapse, inflation spirals. Think of it like this. The World Bank gives wood to build hut. The IMF gives bandage when hut catches fire. Both lend. Both attach conditions. Both trigger anger. But they operate on different timelines. When IMF enters village, it often means the economy is already sick. Foreign reserves low. Currency collapsing. Debt payments due. Capital fleeing. IMF provides short-term emergency funding but demands fiscal tightening, monetary reform, sometimes harsh austerity. And villagers feel pain immediately. Bread doubles in price. Fuel subsidies cut. Public sector wages frozen. So they shout, "IMF ruining tribe." Sometimes they are reacting to necessary stabilization. Sometimes they are reacting to policy mistakes made long before IMF arrived. And sometimes leaders blame IMF to hide their own mismanagement. Caveman began to see the pattern. Big money caves appear when something is already broken. And when fear fills air, blame travels fast. But the deeper lesson was still forming. The real problem was not that the World Bank or IMF existed. The real problem was what leaders did before and after signing scroll. Some nations used World Bank loans to transform their economies. South Korea borrowed for infrastructure, then built globally competitive industries. Vietnam leveraged development financing to modernize agriculture and manufacturing. Other nations borrowed repeatedly without structural reform, creating cycles of dependency. Same institution, different outcomes. Because debt is not destiny, governance determines outcome. And then Caveman asked the question that scratched brain like ant bite. If biggest tribes vote louder and politics sits inside cave, how can small tribes protect themselves? Greg answered quietly, with knowledge. Understand contracts. Negotiate carefully. Choose projects wisely. Strengthen institutions domestically. Transparency is armor. Competence is shield. Because ignorance in the money cave costs more than goat. And Caveman finally understood something heavy. World Bank money is not rain from heaven. It is fire. Fire cooks meat. Fire burns huts. The difference is who controls flame. But the story is not complete yet. Because even after understanding ownership, voting power, and conditionality, one final truth remains. The World Bank is only powerful because countries want what it offers. And what it offers is hope. The question is whether hope becomes strategy or illusion. Caveman once believed tribes love the World Bank. Later, Caveman realized tribes do not love the bank. They love hope. And hope is most intoxicating when the tribe feels stuck. When roads crumble, when youth unemployment rises, when crops fail, when power flickers. When neighboring tribes seem to leap forward with shiny factories and clean water. In those moments, a development loan does not look like debt. It looks like a rain cloud over dry land. And this is where the obsession begins. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, developing nations have often treated external loans as shortcuts to catch up. Industrialize faster, build bigger. Leapfrog history. And sometimes they succeeded. China borrowed and absorbed global capital while maintaining tight domestic control. It used infrastructure financing strategically ports, highways, industrial zones, then moved up the value chain. Singapore leveraged development financing and foreign capital to build world-class infrastructure and education systems. In those cases, loans were tools inside coherent national strategies. But here is the dangerous comparison. Many other nations borrowed not from strategy, but from insecurity. Leaders wanted ribbon-cutting ceremonies, mega projects, international praise, political survival. And the debt clock was always quieter than the applause. Caveman remembered Chief Papa waving a scroll triumphantly. "We build mega festival dome," he shouted. The tribe clapped. Free coconut water. Dancing lights, imported decorations. 3 moons later, dome half built. Workers unpaid. Crops still dying because irrigation project postponed. Interest growing like weeds after rain. This is not fiction. There are ghost airports in Africa, empty stadiums in Latin America, underused highways in South Asia, all financed through external borrowing. And in many cases, the projects were not inherently foolish. The problem was sequencing. Building a stadium before building a tax system. Building a port before developing domestic industry. Building prestige before building productivity. Debt is time borrowed from the future. If that borrowed time is invested wisely, the future grows larger. If borrowed time is wasted, the future shrinks. And here is where the trap tightens. When a country accumulates too much debt and growth does not materialize, it must refinance. Refinancing means new loans to pay old loans. Soon, repayment consumes budget space. Education spending squeezed. Healthcare squeezed. Infrastructure maintenance squeezed. Taxes rise. Citizens angry. Politicians blame external lenders. External lenders demand reform. Cycle repeats. This is what analysts call a debt spiral. Caveman experienced it personally when tax collectors came for Butterbean, the goat. "I never danced in the dome," Caveman screamed. Collector shrugged. Loan taken by country, paid by people. This is sovereign debt in its simplest form. Citizens do not individually sign the scroll, but they collectively pay. Through taxes, through inflation, through cuts, through currency depreciation. Now here is the critical nuance experts often debate. Is the World Bank responsible when projects fail, or is the borrowing government responsible? The honest answer is uncomfortable. Both share roles, but accountability is asymmetric. The borrower chooses the project. The lender evaluates risk and attaches conditions. If evaluation fails or political pressures distort approval, weak projects get financed. But the ultimate use of funds lies inside the borrowing country, which brings us to modern crises. In recent decades, countries like Argentina, Sri Lanka, and others have cycled through borrowing, reform, crisis, restructuring. Each time, citizens feel pain. Each time, political narratives simplify blame. Foreign lenders trapped us. Sometimes true. Sometimes partially true. Sometimes leaders masked incompetence behind external scapegoats. Debt negotiations become public theater. Bondholders demand repayment. Governments plead hardship. IMF enters with stabilization program. Protests erupt. And global headlines reduce complex financial engineering into moral outrage. Caveman began to notice something. The loudest voices in the market often had the least understanding of the scroll. People shouted, "debt trap," without reading terms. Others shouted necessary reform, without seeing street-level suffering. Reality lived in the tension. Development financing is not inherently predatory, but neither is it risk-free empowerment. It is a contract between unequal actors operating in an unequal world. Power differences matter. Information differences matter. Institutional capacity matters. And then, something even more subtle revealed itself. Countries that repeatedly succeed with development loans tend to share one thing: strong domestic institutions, transparent procurement, professional civil service, independent auditing, clear long-term strategy. In other words, they treat external financing as supplemental, not foundational. Countries that repeatedly struggle often lack institutional resilience. Corruption leaks funds. Policy shifts every election. Data unreliable. Oversight weak. External loans become bandages over structural wounds. Caveman carved on cave wall. Loan cannot fix tribe that refuses to fix itself. Luna Logic nodded approvingly. But she added, "Also remember, big lender must be careful not to push tribe into swamp." Just because swamp is politically convenient, because geopolitics still shadows the money cave. Powerful countries sometimes support loans that align with strategic interests even. If project economics are marginal, security, trade routes, resource access. So debt and power dance together, and smaller nations must navigate carefully. Which brings Caveman to final question. If World Bank is tool, if IMF is emergency healer, if debt is fire, if power follows money, then what should tribe do? Worship the cave, hate the cave, or understand the cave? Because misunderstanding is the most expensive loan of all. And the final section is not about the bank. It is about choice. After many winters of scroll reading, goat, crying, and arguing with banker Greg, Caveman finally stopped asking whether the World Bank was good or evil. That was the wrong question. The right question was simpler. Who is holding the rope? The World Bank is like a mammoth. Massive, powerful, capable of moving stones no tribe could move alone. Harnessed wisely, the mammoth builds bridges, carries food across mountains, drags timber for houses. Handled carelessly, the mammoth tramples huts, crushes bones, scatters supplies. The mammoth is not moral. The handler is. And here lies the final truth. The World Bank is not a fairy tale villain. It is not a miracle rain god. It is a financial institution built by governments, funded by capital subscriptions, governed by voting power, operating within geopolitical reality, and structured to lend for development with conditions designed to protect repayment. Nothing mystical, nothing secret. Nothing secret, nothing charitable in the emotional sense. It is a contract machine. Countries ask for money. The bank evaluates risk. The bank attaches conditions. Money flows. Repayment begins. If the project increases productive capacity, higher exports, improved human capital, more efficient infrastructure, the loan repays itself through growth. If it does not, taxes rise, currency weakens, spending cuts deepen. The bank did not eat the berries. Humans did. Cavemen once blamed the money cave when Butterbean the goat was taken. Later, cavemen realized Chief Papa built dancing lights before irrigation. Debt did not create foolishness. Foolishness amplified debt. But the lesson goes further. Citizens also share responsibility. Because sovereign borrowing is political. Governments sign scrolls because voters reward visible projects. Ribbon cuttings, megadomes, shiny airports. Announcements sound better than maintenance budgets. Short-term applause beats long-term planning. Democracy can accelerate development. It can also accelerate bad debt. This is why literacy in public finance matters. When citizens understand loans, interest, conditionality, and repayment structures, they can ask better questions. What project exactly? What cost-benefit analysis? What maintenance plan? What timeline for return? Who audits spending? What happens if growth underperforms? These questions are not asked before signing the scroll. They will be asked later by tax collectors. Cavemen carved two final messages into the cave wall. Debt is not the enemy. Stupid use of debt is. And if project does not grow the future, do not borrow tomorrow. Because debt is like fire. Fire cooks meat, fire burns cave. And fire always spreads faster than you think. Now, let us zoom out from Caveman's Valley to the modern world. Developing nations still line up for financing climate resilience, digital infrastructure, transport corridors. Advanced economies still influence global lending norms. The IMF still steps in during currency crises. The World Bank still disperses billions in project loans each year, and critics still shout. Supporters still defend. But the mature view, the strategic views, neither worship nor hatred. It is understanding. Big institutions are complicated beasts, made of humans. With hopes, fears, career incentives, geopolitical pressures, and technical models. Understanding them is not boring. Understanding them is survival. A tribe that understands how money flows eats in winter. A tribe that claps blindly starves while dome lights blink. Caveman no longer panics when hearing words like World Bank, IMF, interest rate volatility, or structural adjustment. Caveman asks, what is the project? What are the terms? What are the conditions? What is the repayment path? Who benefits? Who bears risk? That is the difference between citizen and spectator, between handler and victim, between ladder and chain. At the next council meeting, Chief Papa again proposed a shiny golden statue. The tribe began clapping automatically. Caveman stood slowly. Before we clap, he said calmly, will this statue bring water? Will it bring trade? Will it bring knowledge? Or will it bring tax collectors with long faces and longer scrolls? silence fell like snow. Even Papa scratched his head. Because once a tribe understands fire, it stops playing with sparks. So here is the closing thought for you. The World Bank is not here to save you. It is not here to destroy you. It is here to lend. The rest depends on governance, competence, institutional strength, and public awareness. The money cave is powerful. But ignorance is more expensive than interest. If this story made you laugh, think, or pause before signing a shiny scroll, share it with your tribe. Because the next time someone says World Bank bad or World Bank hero, you will know better. You will understand that the real question is not about the cave. It is about the chief and the citizens. Guard your goats. Question your leaders. Read the scroll before signing. And never build a statue before building a well.